Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Thursday, July 11th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the latest film and TV news. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta. And joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And Writer Hoai-Tran Bui.
Hey, everyone.
Okay, we have a bunch of news to get to. I promise one of these days we're going to record a water cooler, but it's just been kind of crazy here at Slash Film headquarters. So let's first talk about Star Wars, because there's a bunch of Star Wars news that dropped. Yesterday, we learned of a new Stormtrooper. Brad, tell us about it.
Yeah, out of nowhere yesterday, even though Star Wars won't be at San Diego Comic-Con with a panel or anything, that doesn't mean they won't have a presence, because Lucasfilm announced that they will have a special booth set up that will kind of pay tribute to the history of Stormtroopers. It'll have a bunch of different variants of the armor there's been over the years, from the Death Troopers to Rogue One to the original Imperial Stormtroopers. And one of them will be a brand new Stormtrooper that will make its debut in Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, and that is the Sith Trooper. This is a Stormtrooper that we had heard of previously, just not by this name, because there were rumors that there was a new variation of Stormtrooper dressed entirely in red armor, and that's exactly what this is. But this isn't just a white Stormtrooper that happens to have red armor. The design definitely has a lot of similarities, but there are some extra details in the armor and some of the tactical gear. The helmet, actually, the design is made to look just slightly more menacing. The eyes on the helmet are designed in such a way that it almost gives it like a scowl expression, as opposed to the basic blank, kind of Stormtrooper helmet. And there's just little subtle design differences on the armor that has these ridged lines on certain pieces of the armor. There's some extra tactical parts that are on it that look like they probably work in tandem with their weapons, which are red and black as well. And they have quite an arsenal. If you look at the exclusive Black Series figure that Hasbro will be releasing at Comic-Con, it comes with 5 different weapons, ranging from a small blaster to a huge cannon, like a laser cannon. And it just looks really cool. The best glimpse comes from the Hot Toys figure, just because they always have the most detailed figures with their 6 scale. And along with the glimpse of how cool the armor is, there's also an interesting new symbol used to represent the Sith that we haven't seen before. So much like the Rebel Alliance and the Galactic Empire and the Jedi all have their own kind of circular logo, the Sith now have their own circular logo as well.
Yeah, because the Sith have to, have banners and things to advertise themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like, they need to have flags.
Yeah, what's weird about this, though, is that we kind of, it was understood, or at least we thought anyway, that Supreme Leader Snoke and Kylo Ren weren't necessarily Sith. They were just on the dark side of the Force.
Yeah, I think J.J. Abrams actually said that when promoting Force Awakens. Someone asked him if Snoke was a Sith, and he said no. I don't know if anybody ever confirmed if Kylo is a Sith or not. Yeah,
that's true. Kylo easily could have been still, but he also has that designation of being the Master of the Knights of Ren, whatever the hell that means. So it'll be interesting to see what how these operate. I'd be willing to bet these kind of work in the same way that the Secret Service does for the president, where they're the most trusted people, working around the leaders of the First Order, maybe more elite, maybe they carry out more dangerous deeds, that kind of thing.
The question I have is, why haven't we seen these troopers earlier? If they're the Secret Service, shouldn't we have seen them in the previous 2 installments? I know, Star Wars does this all the time, but usually it's in the guise of oh, we're going to a mountain planet, so we're going to introduce these mountain troopers. And that makes sense because we haven't seen the mountains yet. Do you know what I mean? But
maybe it's a new thing that Kylo Ren has instituted now that he is the Supreme Leader, because before he was working under Snoke. Snoke wasn't actually, around until The Last Jedi, but he was on his own ship, so there's really no need to have them there, even though he had those Praetorian guards. So maybe this is something that Kylo Ren institutes to give him additional protection since he's the First Order leader now.
That's a good point, although I just assumed that the Knights of Ren were kind of his Secret Service of some kind. Ben, what do you think of this? What do you make of this? Is this just a further way to them to tie this into the previous 8 films, bringing it back to the Sith?
I guess so, man. I got to be honest with you guys. Like, this is more you and Brad's realm of Star Wars. Like, this level of minutia, I just sort of disengage from it when it gets down to this level of like nitty gritty stuff. And I'm just like, I just want the story. I just want to see the movie and see how these things factor in. And then if they happen to be like a significant portion of the movie or some sort of surprising element, then I might go a little deeper and try to like learn more about them. But for me, it's just, this is for like deep Star Wars fans, and I'm just like a movie guy, you know.
And you never know, because they release these figures and these things, like even wore those new guards in The Last Jedi in the red,
the Praetorian guards.
Praetorian guards. I mean, they did have a big scene in that movie, but they weren't really that much of a force in that film, I would say. So, you know,
they were just there for the aesthetic, really.
Yeah, I remember.
I still think they're very cool, though.
Yeah, and you know, there's been times where like Constable Zuvio was all over the marketing for Force Awakens. They had a figure; he wasn't even in the movie. They always introduce a droid that we think is going to be like super important, and then he just has like a 1-second scene, and you know, tons of action figures. So we don't know how big of a part these stormtroopers will have, but I will say I think they look cool. I was imagining from all the like the rumor and leaks and stuff that were coming out of the film, they were saying there was going to be these red stormtroopers. I thought they were just going to be the same First Order stormtrooper but painted red. And I think all those details that you were talking about, Brad, like the slats and just the more menacing design, it is, you know, I'm in. But we'll put a link to that in the show notes. So if you want to check it out and you haven't seen it online, you can see the new toys, and they're going to have like a full-sized prop replica at Comic-Con, I think.
Yeah, it'll be one of the mannequins that has an actual armor set up on it, so everyone will get a real close-up look at it. And since we'll be on the ground at Comic-Con, we'll have some pictures from the show floor to give you guys a better look at that.
100%. Okay, so that's not the only Star Wars news today. We also have some news on Star Wars Rise of the Resistance. This is the second ride coming to Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Many people had assumed that it was going to be opening when the land opened. When Disney announced that the land was opening with only one ride, people were surprised, and they thought that this was just going to come later on in the summer. But now with this announcement, this opening date announcement, it has shocked many people because it's delayed further than expected. Ben, what do we know?
Yeah, so Rise of the Resistance, which is being touted as, what do they call it? The most immersive and advanced attraction ever imagined in a Disney park, is the official description of this ride, is going to be opening at Walt Disney World first, and that opening date is going to be on December 5th, 2019, and it won't actually be opening in Disneyland in Anaheim here in California until January 17th of 2020. So that is a pretty significant time period, you know, difference from when Galaxy's Edge opened here in California on May 31st, and then the Walt Disney World version opens on August 29th, and they're still going to have to wait, you know, over a good portion of time as well. So
it's also surprising because like they started construction on Galaxy's Edge here, like they you know, we posted those photos when we saw those full-size AT-ATs. And they hadn't built those until I think 6 months later there, and that's part of that ride. So one would think that they would be ready here before they would be ready there, which gets me wondering. I know there's been all sorts of rumors that there's the ride is not working correctly, that, you know, it has some critical failures, and they've been working to, you know, fix those critical failures. We don't know if any of that is true. It also makes me wonder, this opening date, you said December, what was it?
December 5th.
December
2019.
5th. So that's like, you know, within 2 weeks of the opening of Rise of Skywalker. I wonder if that's strategic in some way. Like, will they have the world premiere of Rise of Skywalker in Orlando, and that's part of why they're opening around that date? Or maybe to, you know, coincide, they can do some combined marketing. Maybe it's more of that kind of thing. I don't know. It's really,
I guess, but like, think about, you know, we've been talking a little bit about theme parks on the and Disney specifically on the podcast recently, and like this seems like a sorely needed attraction for Disney because, Peter, you especially have been keeping a really close eye on this, and like Disneyland rather has been like relatively empty, not nearly living up to the estimated number of people who would be visiting Galaxy's Edge here in California during these opening months. So, I don't know if they would go as far as to like purposefully delay something just so they could like have some extra publicity and have a premiere there when they could theoretically, if they wanted to, if everything was operational or whatever, then they could, have. I think that trade, of having more people in the park would be more valuable to them.
I almost wonder, when they were building this here and they were ahead of Orlando, if once they've reached the point where they were having these rumored failures with the ride system, this is the most technologically advanced ride that Disney has ever produced, like you said, if that information that they learned from that was, since they were so far behind in Orlando, if they were able to implement changes that basically escalated that version of the ride to open before ours. Does that make sense? So I'm wondering if that's possible. But this whole Disneyland Resort thing is fascinating. I'm wondering on the next Disney earning call how much of an impact this is going to have, because I have friends that are cast members. They have put a hiring freeze. They have cut hours. People that were part-time that were expecting to get 30 hours a week are getting 1 day a week, like a 4-hour shift. It's people's hours have been cut down. There's like a lot of performers. Like there's this Newsboys show that has been going on in DCA since Cars Land opened, whenever that is, and that's shutting down this month. So they're like trying to cut, as much fat off what they're spending as possible because no one's coming here. And it seems to me, like you said, that people aren't coming for a variety of reasons, which we've talked about on this podcast. I'm not going to go over it, but I think the main one is people don't want to travel to Star Wars Galaxy's Edge when it's only half open. Do you know what I mean? When it's only one ride. And I feel like delaying this further, it's just going to hurt them and their holiday earnings for the theme parks. But I mean, I guess it's good for guests because, I was just there the other day and it was empty. It was it was a really enjoyable experience from a guest perspective. But from Disney must not be happy. But okay, let's move on from Star Wars to Sam Raimi, and let's talk about Evil Dead. Is there going to be another Evil Dead, HT?
Well, Sam Raimi seems eager to get one off the ground, or from under the ground, you might say.
I knew there was a pun coming.
So Bruce Campbell has reportedly hung up the chainsaw for good after reprising his role as the protagonist of the Evil Dead franchise in Ash vs. the Evil Dead. But Sam Raimi seems like he wants to entice his star back to the franchise for a new movie sequel. He's confirmed that he is currently in discussions with Bruce Campbell, Rob Tapert, to possibly go one or two different ways for a new movie. He wants to do it as a feature film and not as another TV show. But he said if Bruce Campbell doesn't want to come out of retirement for this character, he is willing to have this new Evil Dead sequel pick up the storyline from Fede Alvarez's 2013 remake/reboot.
Okay, so this won't be a sequel to his original movies, but this would be a sequel to the one that came out just a few years ago.
Yes, if he can't get Bruce Campbell back on board. But it seems like
what else is Bruce Campbell doing? Like, is he really like? I imagine he's like in some tropical place, drinking some kind of tropical drink out of a coconut. But I'm sure he's not like swimming in the money. He doesn't have Scrooge McDuck's money pit, right? Like,
probably not. But maybe he's trying to negotiate a little with Sam Raimi here. But it's possible he could come back. There's always a possibility. Bruce Campbell is still a very fit guy. So it's if he comes back, then it would more likely be a direct sequel to the original Evil Dead movies. But Sam Raimi also has a third option that he proposed, in which both the Bruce Campbell movies and the Fede Alvarez reboot would take place in the same universe. So a Evil Dead cinematic universe, you might say.
Ben, Brad, do either of you want that?
No.
I mean, maybe just for like the WTF-ness of it, like, sure, yeah, go for broke, like, why not, but like, am I genuinely interested in it? No, I don't think so.
I didn't see the new Evil Dead, but it seems like it has such a different tone than the original, especially like Army of Darkness. Like, I don't even understand how those would mash together. But I don't know. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about Sherlock Holmes 3, something that we've been talking about for, like 6 years now or something. Is this thing going to actually happen, Brad?
It seems like it. Now that Robert Downey Jr. is all finished with Iron Man. That's right, Iron Man is dead. Sorry, guys, if you don't know about it by now. But Robert Downey Jr.'s schedule is much more free, and that was kind of what was holding up Sherlock Holmes 3 from happening in the what will be 10 years since Sherlock Holmes: A Game of Shadows was released by the time Sherlock Holmes 3 comes out. But it won't be Guy Ritchie behind the camera for the sequel. Apparently, it will be Dexter Fletcher, fresh off directing the Elton John biopic Rocketman. He'll now be behind the camera for this sequel. We don't really know much about it, except it sounds like it will probably take place in the United States during the time of the Old West, which sounds fun enough to do another Sherlock Holmes movie. I personally didn't think Game of Shadows was all that great, despite the introduction of Moriarty and having Jared Harris play him. But the prospect of having Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law as Holmes and Watson in the Wild West sounds like it could be pretty fun to me. I'll be most interested to see whether or not there's still a good audience for these movies. They were fairly popular when they came out. The sequel made slightly less than the first one domestically, but it made almost the same amount that it lost in the US domestic box office. It gained in the international box office. So it just remains to be seen whether or not the 10-year gap between sequels will, create a sort of a detriment, I guess, for audiences to have an interest in it, especially with all the franchise fatigue it seems there's been this summer. But Robert Downey Jr. is a big star. People seem to have liked his take on Sherlock Holmes, and we'll find out when it comes out in December of 2021.
Is anybody here excited for Sherlock Holmes 3? I mean, I feel like I really loved that original movie, and then the sequel, the only thing I can remember loving about it is that Hans Zimmer song that I think he was nominated for Academy Award for. HT, Ben, are either of you excited?
Not particularly.
Ben,
yeah,
you're the big mystery guy here.
Yeah, and I love Sherlock Holmes as a character. I am interested in this because the Guy Ritchie style is so unique, and for Dexter Fletcher to come in, for the third movie in this franchise, I'm wondering if they're going to have it be, excuse me, more of like a clean break almost from the first two movies, and especially with that 10-year gap too. Like, if they're not going to have it rely so much on the mythology that they've already established in the first two movies, if it's going to be sort of like a clean entry point for people, I don't know, that could work. And Dexter Fletcher is an interesting guy. He's made Rocketman, as Brad said, but he also directed this movie called Eddie the Eagle, which I really liked, from 2015, I think. And he's an actor as well. He started out as an actor, so he's definitely like an actor's director. So I feel like he could get really good performances out of Downey and Jude Law. And yeah, I like their chemistry as those characters. So this one's a big question mark for me right now.
I feel like I still don't believe this is happening until it's in actual production. But let's talk about something interesting. I'm wondering what this is, because I didn't actually get a chance to read the story before this broadcast. But IMAX has announced that Spike Jonze is joining them as an artist in residence. HT, what does that even mean?
That's a big question for now. He's going to be the first ever artist in residence for IMAX Entertainment. And his role will supposedly help, quote, identify new creative opportunities and partnerships across its platform. So I'm assuming it has something to do with IMAX trying to expand its sort of tech company reach into something that's more creative. They've been doing some more experimental projects recently, like with Paul Thomas Anderson's Anima, they did a one-day screening of the 15-minute one-reeler. And I think that they're trying to do something more than just be a tool for blockbuster filmmaking. That's kind of what I'm seeing it for now. There aren't a lot of details as to what Spike Jonze's responsibilities or his role will be, but it seems like an interesting partnership.
Yeah, I mean, IMAX has always been about creating some like exclusive content, either being exclusive in it being a 70mm presentation, the aspect ratio. I'm wondering if they could maybe start like a way of like doing their own like short films before Hollywood features, like, you know, get big people like Jones or Paul Thomas Anderson and, you know, attach that to the IMAX versions of films and maybe tempt people to come to theaters for that.
That would be interesting. Like in sort of along the lines of a Pixar short in a way.
Yeah. Like I'm kind of wondering if that's even worth it for IMAX to spend that money, but I'm guessing, at least from what I've heard, I'm guessing IMAX gets a bigger percentage of that box office money than like a normal theater does. So maybe it is. I don't know. Speaking of box office, Hobbs and Shaw is gearing to come out, and we have the tracking numbers. Ben, I'm really curious, how does this compare to the other Fast and the Furious franchise films?
Yeah, so Hobbs & Shaw is the first spin-off in the Fast and Furious franchise, and right now it is on track to pull in between $55 and $65 million domestically during its opening weekend. So that is a pretty significant drop from the most recent Fast and Furious movie, which was called The Fate of the Furious. That one came out in 2017 and had a $98 million opening weekend. So I actually did like a full sort of a box office ranking that you can find in this article on Slash Film in the show notes. But if Hobbs and Shaw actually tops out at the upper end of this projection and it makes $65 million, that's going to put it like in the low middle in terms of like ranking among the other Fast and Furious movies for domestic opening weekends. So that's not great, but I mean, it sort of makes sense for a spinoff. The interesting thing here, though, is that these are just domestic numbers, and the Fast and Furious franchise is like one of the most dominant global franchises that we have in the modern blockbuster sphere right now. So this movie is going to be opening in China, which is a huge deal for any major blockbuster looking to maximize its profits. So I think globally it's going to be just fine, and will probably be the first of a lot of Fast and Furious spin-offs coming eventually, even though it may not, blow anybody away with the numbers that it does domestically.
This is really curious to me because I really think that like Hobbs and Shaw are some of the best parts of the Fast and the Furious franchise, and I assumed that we would be tracking higher than this. I know this is a spin-off, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe more people are coming out to these films for the family.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of like the emotional heart of these films, and I mean I love the trailers of Hobbs and Shaw because they're just so ridiculous. But I wonder if people are starting to draw a line, somewhere like, all right, how these vehicles have been launched out of planes, they've gone through skyscrapers. Like, how far are we going to go with this? And the answer is as far as Universal will take it. But I don't know. I'm curious to see if people are going to actually turn out for this one in a big way, because Dwayne Johnson is obviously like a big draw globally, and Jason Statham, he's not nearly as big of a star as Johnson is. Johnson's like arguably the biggest movie star in the world right now, but he's still a decent draw himself. So I was looking at their highest opening weekends of their careers, and all of them right now are Fast and Furious movies. So this one will probably be right up there with them. Yeah.
Okay, our last story for today is a story about Zack Snyder creating an anime series for Netflix. HT, this sounds like it's half up your alley and then half not up your alley.
Yeah, it's quite a Mad Libs of a headline, isn't it? So Zack Snyder is creating an all-new original anime series for Netflix that will be, quote, set in the world of Norse mythology. He's partnering up with Jay Oliva, who he has worked with before on his live-action feature films like Justice League, Batman v Superman, 300, Man of Steel, and he's going to be creating and executive producing this series series, while Oliver will be working as showrunner. So, this is quite a strange collaboration right here. Zack Snyder has never done an anime series before, though he's actually credited anime as being a big influence on some of his films, such as Sucker Punch and even Man of Steel. So, and if you kind of look at his visual style, it's not that far from anime, which I feel like I'm trying to explain away the story a bit and trying to make it seem a little less weird. And Zack Snyder has done animation before. He's directed the Legends of the Guardians, the Owls of Ga'Hoole film, which was a beautiful CG animated film, if a messy movie, but
that no one saw. Unfortunately,
that no one saw. I saw it, but it wasn't great. So we'll see. It's definitely an odd combination, but
and he also did that Watchmen directed DVD animated movie, the Black Sail.
Yeah, the Curse of the Black Freighter, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, that's it. Which I never actually saw. So yeah, he does have some animated roots, but I don't know. What do you think of this? Like, it sounds like it could be a compelling story. I mean, I guess I see how he's like, I can connect the dots now that you've laid it out for me, HT. Especially, he has the history with 300, and now this is mythology, and it's anime, which he's clearly been inspired by. But do we want to see Zack Snyder being in charge of this series?
Well, for me, I wonder if Zack Snyder has ever expressed an interest in anime beyond their sort of surface level visual trappings, and if it'll just be more than the visual spectacle that we know him for. And if not, then I'm sure it'll be a very pretty and very visually stunning series, but maybe not something that people will want to keep coming back to. Yeah. But again, it could be interesting.
I do like how these streaming services are giving these big filmmakers a place to be creative and show what they're capable of, and maybe Zack Snyder's been restrained. I hope not, because that idea to me is pretty sad, because it doesn't seem like he's been restrained.
I mean, the thing about this is, like, I give Zack Snyder a fair amount of crap because of some of the movies that he's made, but I feel like this particular instance is an opportunity of him, is an instance of him, like, basically using his position to give a longtime collaborator the reins of a project, because Jay Oliva, I think that's how you pronounce his name, is like a storyboard guy who's been working with him, as she said, on a bunch of different projects. And Oliva is the one who's going to be the showrunner, director, and executive producer here. And it seems like Snyder might just be sort of attaching his name to it to, like, help get it off the ground, kind of thing, and, like, overseeing it from an executive producer standpoint, just from a distance. And I don't know if that's the case, then, like, this is a really cool move by Zack Snyder to give, somebody who clearly has a passion for animation and visual storytelling the opportunity to tell a new story like this. So, more power to Zack Snyder if that's actually what's going on here.
Well, very well said. I think that brings us to the end of today's Slash Film Daily. You can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com. You can find the links to the stories we talked about on today's podcast linked in the show notes. This podcast, Slash Film Daily, is published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. And please rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you tomorrow.